Hello and welcome to West Fox. Today we are talking about one of our all-time golden oldie favorite sci-fi shows, Stargate SG-1.
Yes.
Joining me today is Philip, and we grew up on Stargate.
We certainly did. Stargate, Star Trek, like Voyager, DS9, end of TNG. But Stargate was probably the most impactful, other than, of course, things like Star Wars, but those were in of course, movies.
Yeah, and TV, Stargate was like the daily watch, right? We always watched it every time it came out, every night, or every week it came out. We watched that show. We also watched Atlantis that came out. Neither of us, nor our other brother, who you might eventually meet here, liked Universe. We all pretty much just straight up hated that one, and it was awful.
Terrible.
But what I've seen in...
I love you, Dave Cullen, but it still sucks. I love you. I think you're great. You probably never listened to this video, but it's still a terrible, terrible series, and they did a poor job. Yeah, he did a couple breakdown returning back to SGU, and he kind of had the same reaction as most fans, but then he started to have an appreciation for it, and I completely disagree.
I've heard the later seasons were palatable. I'm sure compared to some stuff nowadays, it probably is better than now you look back. But the reason I wanted to talk about that Stargate today was there have been rumblings in the deep, and I've slowly seen a slight pickup on people talking about Stargate, and mostly because they're kind of clamoring for either MGM to start a reboot on the show. There have been rumors for years about the original team coming in and producing a new movie trilogy, and that's all crumbled down since then. Years ago, Ben Browder, who played, who did he play? Lieutenant Commander... Ben
Browder?
Yeah, Ben Browder played
Cameron
Mitchell.
Replacement for O'Neill. Yeah, Cameron Mitchell.
And he played Cameron Mitchell. And he was pretty well liked overall as a replacement for, bringing him in. I think he was pretty well.
Yeah, he didn't do a bad job. I mean, I appreciate him more having rewatched it, but when it first happened, I'm like, screw you! He'll never be Richard Dean Anderson.
Yeah,
ever.
well, and it's pretty hard to beat him anyway.
True.
And he came in and he was a pretty solid. Didn't he come in for Daniel Jackson though too?
No, that was a Quinn character.
Oh yeah, that was the other guy. That's right. It's been a long time since I've seen the show.
I can't remember his name.
But I believe he tried to years ago negotiate a deal with MGM, and there was some kind of non-ink shaking of hands, and there was a change of power over there, and then all that kind of went to the wayside.
I don't think. I mean, you could be correct, but I never heard that. I think that's Joe Flanagan.
Actually, it's Joe Flanagan.
Might be confusing with Shepard. He was
Shepard. That's who it. Okay, I'm
totally.
I was in numbers. Yeah, so I'm totally wrong. Yeah, he brought in. He wanted to do some more, I think most people supported him in this because he was a fan, and so I've noticed
a legitimate one. Yeah, a legitimate fan. Mm-hmm.
And I think that what I see is people are like, oh, let's do another show. Let's do a reboot. Let's do either a reboot or another season. And now, one side of me says yes. I would love to see more Stargate. It's a great concept of a show, a lot of fun. Now, obviously, my other side goes, in the woke 2020s, and as we've seen pretty much every sci-fi franchise in mainstream existence, either, forgotten or SJW to death, essentially. Look at Doctor Who for examples of that. I kind of go, wow, that's going to be a show that would be just ruined because they try to insert politics into it. Because there's a level of politics already built into the show since it's actually an American show. They're actually in the show, they're actually in America. Obviously, it wasn't filmed in America, but they actually had American politics in it. There was presidents and congressmen and that kind of stuff. And it was done pre the current level of, over politicalness in movies and TV shows. And so I could just see a terrible, terrible reboot done, especially if the people producing it had no love for the original material. So I did recently see that there was some talk that Apple TV Plus, their service, just Apple in general, Apple might be interested in purchasing Stargate from MGM because they just want more franchises for everything. Yes. Now, it's a rumor, obviously. I'm talking deep tier rumors because honestly, other than a few diehards, which I don't know the percentage of people out there who are diehard Stargate fans, regardless, Stargate is not in the mainstream conversation. When people are talking about sci-fi, they're not bringing Stargate up in a general conversation. People still bring up Star Trek, still bring up Star Wars, but Stargate kind of is a, I don't want to say the dead franchise, because I feel like a dead franchise were killed. I mean, I guess on some level, Universe did do some damage, but I think it was so short-lived that it never had a chance to take on like, oh, people say it ruined the show, I feel like, at least for me, because I still have the two great shows previously.
Yeah, I agree. I think
it's like in a hiatus.
Yeah.
It's like Doctor Who before the 2005 reboot, where it is prime for a reboot. It's been over 10 years, I believe, since the last season of the show, I think, at least for SG-1. And it is prime for, I don't want to say a reboot, a continuation. The one thing I loved about the show, I'm not going to go too deep into this part because it's more a conversation about like, in general. But one thing I loved about the show is the allowing of growth for the characters and the world building, because they start out, spoilers, pretty much not understanding what the gates are, how they work, and what they can do, till the end of the show, where we literally have intergalactic travel, spaceships we're building, weapons, we're fighting wars with other alien races, winning sometimes losing, so, have all the casualties, generally winning in the sense of it, because, they're the heroes, but actually facing higher level threats throughout the show. And, you look at like a Star Trek, which I do love Star Trek, but Star Trek has this, pretty much nothing changes for the characters. Other than maybe the Borg stuff in Next Generation.
It's generally episodic.
Yeah.
Period. Yeah, there may be a minor overarching theme, say at Voyager, because they're trying to get home.
And I think Deep Space Nine was probably the least of that, I would say, because they do more, they actually have a war in Deep Space Nine, the Dominion War and some stuff like that. So they actually have some level of like change in the background of the story, but it's still not on the level of the progression that Stargate had for its characters and its world, which I think was one of the coolest things about it. And it had great characters. I think that the cast in general grew, the characters changed throughout the show, and I think that the actors loved doing the show too, and that shows.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And I think that answers your question. Unlike things like Star Trek, where it was episodic, so you could just restart the same type of format basically in a new year and a new whatever, and just go episode to episode. I think the reason that Stargate feels final is because they actually did a very good job in going through the steps, going through bad guys. First, you started with minor system lords, and then you find out, oh my gosh, there's more than just one, right? The movie started it off. They thought there was only one. Then they find out there's actually more. And as time progresses, they become more powerful. They start making allies. They eventually defeat the Goa'uld for the most part, and then they run into the new threat, and the new threat's then dealt with. I think the reason that worked out very well was because it kind of all finished up in a very neat package. And I think that's what was key, unlike other television shows where it's like, well, it's ending, here it goes. The story was actually finished. I mean, it had done such a good job, actually, that it actually finished the story 3 years earlier, and that's why they brought the Orion in the first place. When it came to Stargate...
Which were one of the weaker antagonists, only because they were so OP that it created a level of struggle in the show. I would say that was like, oh, darn those ancients. It really came down to, the ancients are jerks. They start problems and create problems and then run away.
Yeah, and I agree on a particular level. Like if this was real, you'd be like, man, those people are the worst. But I think it was realistic enough in how they'd preset that it did allow for the story to develop naturally, without feeling like, oh, it's the anti-Deus Ex Machina, right? They're not the answer to anything, but they're keeping the answer that would really happen, the destruction of the taking over by the Ori, at bay. And in fairness, they had set those seeds. I'm sure they weren't thinking this far forward, of course, but they had set that stage when Daniel Jackson was saved.
It's true.
And then him coming back. So they didn't retcon anything. The introduction of the Ancients is probably one of the coolest parts of the entire show.
Agreed. And I think the show's lore, again, is really rich. And so if someone was to come in and start retconning, redoing the show, you're like, why are you losing so much? You're losing so much history of the show that was so well developed. And I would say that as far as I can remember watching it, because I have rewatched it again since then, but I don't recall them ever really retconning stuff too often. They were pretty consistent on keeping the lore consistent. And I would say that if I was to pitch a show, I know they had an animated show they came out with, and it wasn't bad. It falls into the kind of like, oh, it's a decent animated show.
It's like, meh.
Yeah. But I would say that if they were to, in a perfect world, let's say we're gonna be like, hey, they want to do a new season of the show. I would put it towards, hey, it's 20 years farther in the future, because I don't think you're gonna get much of the cast back. I think Richard D. Anderson's completely retired.
Yeah, he's done. You make it Amanda Tapping. I bet you she would show up. I bet you Christopher Judge would show up for like a little brief thing.
Yeah, they could be cameo characters in the background. They could legitimately be like background characters. I'd be okay with that. I think that would be, in their case, smart. I think that the new, I don't know if it needs to be a new threat initially, but they need to figure out what they want. Again, I have to look at how the universe ended, because they started expanding the lore so fast at the end there that it grew so big so fast that the question goes into, what's the next step? Is the Stargate now, because I don't think in the show did they ever make it public to the public, right? The Stargate's existence is public to the general public in this universe. So I don't know if they've ever dealt with that element. And they'd be like, hey, now we can transport across the earth, that kind of stuff. There's aliens and stuff. That could be interesting and done well. Kind of already been done on too many shows, to be honest. So I don't know if I'd enjoy that.
Yeah, I would avoid that.
I'd probably put it like, it's been 30 years. Humanity's kind of gotten used to aliens existing. And in all reality, most of the aliens in Stargate are pretty much either humans from Earth that have been transplanted to other places on Earth, or they are very unhuman things like the Asgard. Now, it would be interesting.
And they're very sparing, which I think was brilliant for Stargate.
Yeah.
I think it was brilliant for them to have very few alien species that existed and having it colonized by the Goa'uld for humans. I thought that was brilliant. Mm-hmm. That works out so well long term.
If there was one retcon that I would be approve of, if there was
SG
one
dying.
Well, yeah. But I would actually say the demise of the Asgard would be my retcon.
That was sad. And
make that part of maybe not a retcon like, oh, they didn't happen, but allowing maybe a fix of that, because I always felt that was a weird story beat and again, it came to the Ori stories where I don't think they were as coherent. And I think that was like a weird story beat choice. It was like, here. I think
they just felt the need to get rid of the Asgard to be helping.
Yeah.
Because they realized that the Asgard were extremely powerful and there was really no reason for them not to be participating now. With the replicators gone and with the Goa'uld all but decimated, there really was no reason for them not to help Earth.
Mm-hmm. And I think them beings. And did they ever meet the Furlongs? I don't think they ever did. So we have a whole...
The Furlings? No, they've never met the Furlings. And that was another thing that I always kind of missed out on.
So I'd say I think
they rushed it. That would have been good.
You have a fourth race, right? Because the humans were the fifth race.
That's
and
right.
so you have this fourth... I think they were the fourth race, but either way.
Nox, Ancient, Asgard, and the Furlings.
Yeah, so we had some old races that we could technically bring back or explore. I think that could be very interesting, especially
well, not only that. If you recall, and this is what I was going to get to the other point, Atlantis was the one that got screwed over. It was still in my at first when I watched it, I thought the show had slowed down, and I thought they were kind of getting drab when I first watched it. But in the last year with my wife, I watched all of Stargate because she'd never seen it, all of Stargate Atlantis. And I realized that Atlantis was just getting into its long strides. It had at least another 3 years to go. That was really, really solid. But since they wanted to get SGU out the door, they rushed it and ended it for absolutely no reason. The Wraith threat was never really dealt with. And I think that what they could do if they really wanted to start off on the paces really, really quickly, I think having the Wraith still be a predominant threat from Pegasus would allow you to have an established bad guy that would be very, very powerful, very, very dangerous, but yet still at arm's length because they'd have to travel the distance of entire galaxies, 2 galaxies and the void in between. So I think that would be a good way to set it up because it gives you the drama, the fear. You're still at war with something that was still very, very powerful. Maybe not technologically, but by still in the numbers. They still had...
Yeah, they were a swarming threat. They're more akin to the replicators, kind of.
Exactly. And I think that would be brilliant because, like you said, then we could introduce the Furlings as a useful technological basis. I don't know how they'd want to introduce it. I don't think going the Nox route would be good because that's kind of annoying, to be honest with you. And then, of course, we already have the ancient technology. Now we have Asgard technology. The Furlings might be a very useful and interesting philosophical concept they could introduce. Not full Nox and maybe not full technological wonder, but maybe a little bit more balanced of a species. I mean, that was at least the advantage of the ancients. They seemed very normal. They seemed more human until they ascended, at least. And then they got kind of, uppity with their
they were very
their ascension, right?
They were very independent in the space. Well, and I think it'd be interesting too. Like I said, if there was a retcon, it'd be bringing back the Asgard somehow, because they never really fixed that struggle for them, right? Because the whole struggle was they had been essentially
they basically self-detonated,
cloning themselves, and so I think that'd be an interesting thing that the Furlongs came back and they're like, well, we're sad that our brother race is erased essentially, and we want to rectify this. And I think that'd be and since it's a race that there's some level, there's an easy enough, I don't want to use MacGuffins too much, but there's an easy enough ways for them to be like,
actually they wouldn't have to.
No,
well, remember the Asgard are also in the Pegasus galaxy. It's a smaller group of them,
true,
and they're kind of like, they're not as magnanimous and covenant based as, and I don't mean covenant like Halo covenant based, but actually with a set of morals and principles and rules and laws that govern them. So that would be an interesting thing, because they could, like you said, maybe with the help of the Furlings, and then be able to, with the access of the history of the Asgard, since they still had that on the ship.
Well, they were all about cloning too, right?
So they literally could preserve. Well, they were, but they actually were not degenerating.
Yeah, but they could also download their minds though, too.
And they weren't degenerating.
But what I mean is more they could download their minds and they have their consciousnesses still saved somewhere possibly type thing they could do.
Well, they would have been on the computer. Yeah, that was the computer that had everything. So yes, there is a way to rebuild it without having to retcon the destruction of the Asgard in the Milky Way, or not in the Milky Way, they were in Ida. In the Ida galaxy, what they could do is introduce the Asgard from Pegasus that had fixed some of the problems, and now they have all the intellectual history and all those minds and consciences and those existences inside their computer and the human side, and they could recreate the Asgardian race, which would be a really cool story.
Yeah, I think they could do some. I agree. I think that would be probably the track I would probably go down there. With those elements, you'd have a lot of layers to work with. Like I said, the show had so many good elements to it over the years. And so that's why for me, when they're like, oh, we just want, a couple years ago when they were like, they're going to do a whole new movie reset, essentially, I was like, it's too bad because you have such good lore to pull from. And that's why it's always weird. And, and I understand, like we talked about Star Wars, we understood because there were so many books and comics and stuff like that. But Stargate is a really consistent package. There's 3 shows, 1 animated series, which you could pretty much throw out. It doesn't really affect anything. Because it was like 20 years in the future when there was another alien to prey stacking, blah, 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 blah. You could probably bring some elements of that in. There's a third, because they were more of like a bee-looking race, I think. They were like alien-looking race. I think there could be some interesting thing there. Could be some interesting stuff there to pull from. It's been a long time since I've seen that show, so I couldn't tell you what I'd pull from it. But I think there is a lot of lore. You could pull a lot of threads out to create some really, really, really good stories. And like I said, have some stuff, because Daniel or Christopher Judge would be great as a cameo character, since he's not technically ages a lot slower. He would be old, but his age would actually work really well in the character space. And so I think
especially since he's even more continually aged, since he was the only one that never got to have himself reversed in the time.
Correct. He has
that episode.
He has a little.
He actually. Yeah,
skunk
he's got a little gray patch. It's awesome.
But yeah, so I think he was such a great character, and he had such good development over the series. He'd be a good one to bring back, and he said, could be a new general, or like I said, people running this stuff, because I think the key is at this point, like I said, humanity knows about all this stuff, and it's not the focus of the show, but we at least acknowledge it, right? Maybe they're no longer underground that same base. They're like, well, we need to move somewhere better because now we're kind of obvious what we're doing.
Freaking Atlantis,
Yeah,
it'd literally be a planetary starbase.
Yeah, they could put them on the moon for all I care. There's a level you could do some interesting stuff, because you've had 30 years to push technology next level. And I think you could do a show, akin to, we're talking about later, but, I haven't finished I finished The Witcher, but like Mandalorian, these shows are running, 8 episodes long. So, they're 8-10 episodes, an hour long episode each. That's what I would do with the show. Do, 8 to 10 really good episodes and do a full season with the show, and allowing yourself to have a little better production value and keep it concise and coherent and really write it out and have a plan for the show. And I think they, don't even put politics in it, but just take the lore. And I think the number one thing I would say is have someone who likes the material, writing and producing it, someone who's competent and likes the material. And then I think you have a winning show, because the show, I think, appeals to everyone. The cast was really good before. Obviously, you do a similar formula, I think, because what the difference in Cast 2 was you had a lot of different philosophies for the main leads. You had the scientist, you had the kind of the pacifist, you had the, military, and you had kind of the defector character. Actually, didn't even think about it just now, but Teal'c is what Finn should have been pretty much in Star Wars. Teal'c is the model they should have followed. So we'll talk about that later, because I don't want to go down that far. But if you
fair enough.
Watch that, because that's could be an interesting conversation. But that's like a great package of characters, and I think if they follow that type of package on who they are as people versus like trying to be like, oh, we need to fill quotas, they could have another really good show. Because I think we're hungry for a good sci-fi show. I could be wrong, but we've had a loss of, like, this was during the golden era of the Sci-Fi Channel and these companies when they're producing this show, and that era is gone. We're in the bottom tier of sci-fi. Like, I've heard The Expanse is good. I've not watched it. A lot of people respect that do talk about shows, talk about it a lot. And so one of these days I might pick it up. But I feel like one sci-fi show that's still good doesn't cover the gamut that we had back in, like I said, the late 90s and early 2000s, where you had, Star Trek was on, you had versions of Star Wars on, you had Stargate, you had Doctor Who,
Galactica, Doctor Who,
and one I want to talk about in the future, Farscape. That's what I was going to say. And actually that's an underrated show. If you've not seen that show, I might do a review in the future. Farscape is
an underrated show.
Very underrated show, because it doesn't follow the standard tropes of the shows. But I would say Farscape and SG-1 is like a great package. You have your kind of more contemporary style with Stargate, and then you have in Farscape, you have your like edgier show that doesn't try to be edgier. It is edgier, but doesn't like try to beat you over the head with it either.
I think that's why a lot of people who liked Farscape, who liked Firefly, and I think if I recall correct, Serenity is
that's just the movie
spin-off.
It was just a wrap-up movie for the show.
Okay, gotcha. I never watched Serenity. I watched Firefly and I watched it, but I never watched that.
If you liked Firefly, it's worth watching, because essentially they compressed probably 2 or 3 seasons into one movie, essentially.
Okay. Then I'll have to watch it. It's been a long, long time since I've seen those. That's why Stargate's really fresh, since I just watched it last year. I think, that's what one thing I was going to say. Yeah, they don't break canon, having watched it all the way through. Number 2, one of the keys that I see in what makes a good television show or not is whether it can be binged or not. You and I had the experience of watching it over years, and that's something that doesn't happen anymore. The cool thing is binging the episodes, it doesn't make them deteriorate. And I think a lot of the reason is because it is a grounded show. It's not so hypothetical, pseudo-intellectual, kind of like Star Trek, where they change the rules whenever they feel like it because it serves the narrative that they're trying to push. And like you said, Farscape, on the other hand, while it's a little more grounded, it is also extremely edgy. You got some very odd looking space characters, some weird little customs that go on, some kind of like, it's kind of that you kind of have to be really a sci-fi person to really, really like that show. Not that it's a bad show, but I think it's kind of like being introduced to anime. There's hardcore anime where it's like, whoa. And then sometimes you just kind of need to introduce yourself into it slowly, and then you can appreciate it. Farscape's kind of the same way. That's what made Stargate very nice. It was grounded, it was intelligent, and it balanced both a story-rich show, but also a character-driven show. And not character-driven like obnoxious drama or silly situations that are just written to the story so that you can draw out these characters. No, it was well-balanced in that the the episodes and the overall storyline drove the characters, and you got to learn along the characters along the way. And that's why I think it is so epic. With that in mind, that's what would worry me with having a 2020 year of this show being made. If this was a decade ago, I would say absolutely. Joe Flanagan, you do what you need to do. You get the rights to this and you finish Stargate Atlantis and start a brand new thing. That would be wonderful. And that's what he wanted to do. Now, SGU was so bad, I wouldn't trust the people who originally started the show, who turned on their own audience and turned on what was really the heart and character and soul of their television show to make SGU, and it was trash. And I wouldn't want any of those people ever involved, because I don't think they would be willing to say, yeah, we screwed up, we're sorry. No, I think it requires, like you said, real fans who loved the first 2 installments and thought, wow, this is a really, really great show. We'd love to see this continue on. But I don't see that happening. And even if you did find people who were willing to do that and who really loved the show, my fear would be that with pressures from maybe your studios or other people involved, directors and all this other stuff, 2019 and 2020 would get in there. And I don't need to watch what happened to Star Trek, happened to Star Wars, what happened to Doctor Who, happened to my quintessential favorite science fiction program being Stargate. I don't want to watch that happen. And Star Wars was, I like Star Trek, but it wasn't a big deal to me because I still have some great episodes and of course a handful of movies that were fantastic. Star Wars really ticked me off. While I liked Doctor Who, I stopped watching after the first season of Capaldi. I hated Clara's character. She was annoying, and I could see the SJW stuff coming in there, and I didn't care anymore. I was like, nah, I have Tenet, I have Matt Smith, 2.5 seasons that were good.
Yeah, she was a character that was so good at one point, and they just Capaldi era was just, yeah.
Oh, that was worse.
We'll have another.
I didn't see that coming, but holy crap, it made her worse.
It was bad, but
2.5. But yeah, I got 2.5 of that. I don't want to watch Stargate get turned into the next
another beloved franchise murdered at the stake.
Yeah, and in fairness, that's my favorite. I've seen so many science fiction shows. I mean, heck, I even watched Andromeda, for crying out loud. And Battlestar Galactica was, the originals were okay. I enjoyed them well enough, and I hated Caprica. I thought that show sucked, and it was terrible. And no, don't try to change my mind because you're wrong. But I've seen so much science fiction, and I can call myself a legitimate nerd for this stuff, that Stargate is the best. It beats them all.
So actually, if you're ranking, it's one of your favorite. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that it's so high in your scale. I just know for me.
Oh yeah, I think with character development, storylines, the groundedness, the way that anyone can actually enjoy this, because it doesn't go to any extremes of weird aliens and characters and stuff, and yet it's still menacing, it's intimidating, and it's motivating and a lot of fun. Stargate is definitely Stargate Atlantis, the best science fiction shows that have been written.
I didn't realize those were so high on your list. I know they're definitely, it's why I brought this conversation up, was to talk about, what we talked about already. But, it was the idea that not another destroyed personal franchise. That's kind of where I come from on this. It's like, hey, if you do something good, we love more. But the pattern right now is taking something that is crushing it and making something new from it that's inferior. And you're like, this is not what I want. I want something new that's new, all across the board, brand new, not recycled old food.
And they did it. They did it once before. And that's what scares me even more. In the middle of the golden age of Stargate, they ended Atlantis short, cut a storyline for no reason to produce junk. And that is what worries me even more. I mean, they did it in the golden era. Now it's 10 years later, give or take a couple years, in the worst cultural zeitgeist of nonsense that we've seen. And you think that's why it ticks me off when I see people be like, yeah, bring back, like, I won't name drop, but like, for certain people on certain chats are like, yeah, bring back Stargate, we want to see Stargate. I'm like, if you really cared about Stargate, you would want it to hide and hibernate in a protected little cavern for the next decade and wait for someone who actually cares and wants to bring it back. Because if you bring it back now, it's going to be junk. Same thing for Star Wars folks. We're like, oh my God, Mandalorian is so good. You know what? Come on, let's put our critical hats on for a second. Is it trash? Complete and utter rubbish like Disney Wars? No. But let's be honest. Is it really that good? No. I stopped watching halfway through. It's boring. It's boring. It doesn't add anything. It's not enjoyable. It's not about Luke Skywalker. It's not about Leia. It's not about Han. And it's not about any characters that matter. It's about a freaking not even a real Mandalorian, a Mandalorian in name only, which only a weird group of people thought the Mandalorians were so cool. It's like, oh man, bounty hunters. Yeah, nobody really cares. They're not really impressive. I don't care. And the fact that they could, in the middle of the best time period, ruin their own franchise terrifies me that if they brought it back, it would be maybe even the worst of the worst. And unless it's Joe Flanagan and it's just him and he hasn't gone SJW himself, no. Keep your hands off of it. I'm going to lock it in a little box and hide it away, cherish it myself forever with my kids in the future, period. Done. End of story.
And I agree with you. And I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you everyone for joining us on our conversation about Stargate. Please like and subscribe if you like, and have an excellent day.
Thank you.